So the next project, yeah, that's a deal. Key references. Okay, everyone.
here. Greetings, everyone. Greetings, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're very excited to have Asanga here to discuss Conundrum of an Island, and especially as many of you may know, in light of recent events, we have a lot to talk about tonight. So thank you for taking the time to come here this evening. Just a few things before we begin. Please silence your cell phones out of respect to our speaker. Thank you. If you happen to buy your copy of the book ahead of time through Eventbrite, just come and let me know before the end of the night so that I can get you all checked out. If you plenty here, though we have a limited number, so if you really want yours, it will be first in line at the end of our event. Just so you know, we will have a question and answer portion for the last 10 to 15 minutes. So if you do have any questions or comments, please hold them until that time. Lastly, this event is being live streamed. Though none of you are visible, if you choose to ask a question or offer a comment, that will be heard on the live stream, just FYI. And also this will be available on our YouTube channel if you want to go back and watch it. Our author this evening. Asanga is an international security and geopolitics analyst and strategic advisor from Sri Lanka. Presently, he serves as a senior fellow at the Millennium Project in Washington, D.C. In 2021, Asanga served as a senior researcher for social impact, conducting a political economic analysis in Sri Lanka for USAID. Asanga has led 2 government think tanks providing strategic advocacy with almost 2 decades of experience in the government sector at foreign policy and defense think tanks. He was the founding director general of the National Security Think Tank under the Ministry of Defense until January 2020. Before this, he served as the executive director at the Foreign Policy Think Tank. His recent book, Conundrum of an Island, is on Sri Lanka's geopolitical challenges and published by World Scientific Singapore. We're going to learn a lot more about you tonight, and I'm very excited to speak with you. But without further ado, please welcome Asanga. Changing hats. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here. I'd like to kind of open this up by hearing a little bit more about your background and your connection to these issues and how this book specifically kind of got on the pathway to becoming published.
Thank you so much, first of all, for with me in your lovely bookstore. So, and thank you for all of you, for making your time and coming here. So really appreciate your presence. So Conundrum of an Island was published in 2021, and this is my 3rd book, followed by the earlier book, which is Sri Lanka at Crossroads, and Towards a Better World Order, my 1st book. So the 2021 book, which we are discussing today, was published by World Scientific in Singapore. And what got me to write this book was my travels to many places, basically to Kazakhstan, to many areas, I mean, regions, the world, East Asia, to Africa, to Middle East. So my travels, as well as what I've captured. I followed the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative of the Chinese projects, one of my interest areas, and the geopolitics of the BRI, the Belt and Road. My interest was on the Indo-Pacific when I sort of writing this larger sort of geopolitical challenges that the world is having. So it was direct interviews carried out, perspectives. For example, in Muscat, at one security conference, I remember Ambassador Alice Wells was there, and we were discussing about terrorists acquiring aerial capabilities, drones. So even those little bits are captured in this book. So whatever the security conferences have been, the dialogues that I have sort of, I've made with Singapore former Foreign Minister Giorgio. He has reviewed my book, as well as many others. So it's all been sort of, adventure that I've, travels as well as what I've sort of gathered and captured.
Absolutely. And before we started the event today, you mentioned that this book is very dense. It contains so much research and analysis, and really dives into the complexities that are facing Sri Lanka right now. I wonder if you can sort of break down a little bit what different elements, what different sections of the book are kind of very important. What are the guidelines that you use to arrange all of this information for the reader?
Well, the book begins with the security chapter. So if you sort of project, assume the book is a cake. So the inside, basically, what I've captured, the main component is the security, as well as the politics, the domestic politics of Sri Lanka. So it's a view from inside, from Sri Lanka to outside. And the icing of the cake basically is the geopolitics, and the cherry is the foreign policy. So if you sort of see the chapter layout was clearly starting on the Asanga terror attack, which happened in 2019, which I witnessed myself and my family. We were walking to the Shangri-La Hotel at that time, and when the bombs went off. So we witnessed that horror. So the book begins that chapter. Basically, I was serving as the Director General of the National Security think tank at that time. So how did we not get it right? And my question, so I'm asking questions, the policy mistakes we have done, also the security information that was shared from India, why we did not sort of, see these security threats. As the Director General, I have written something in January on the same year, 2019, of this particular group. There's a serious threat to the country. But a lot of things went unheard. And some of the things that I borrowed from the US was after the 9/11 terrorist attack, where the ITAC, I have mentioned, the Integrated Threat Assessment Center, which was set up as a recommendation. So those things are, I think I have captured that. So reading those recommendations from the US side on the how they improved their security, and why the Sri Lankan side had multiple stovepipes, did not communicate. So the security issue is being discussed, and also the intelligence sharing among countries. For example, the Indian intelligence informs Sri Lanka there's going to be multiple warnings, but then they did not share with the US. So there was no sort of intelligence sharing regional sort of mechanism. If it actually went to the US, we would have definitely averted the attack. The reason was there was a huge trust deficit between India and Sri Lanka at that time. And I mentioned that in where President at that time was, accusing India, saying that, they're going to assassinate him. So, which was President Sirisena. So it was all a lot of conspiracies, and a lot of, so the social media was blowing out of proportion, all this news. So trying to bring some sort of, all these decisions, the policy decisions that was made, the security threats that India had to face as a country, in this periphery. And I moved to India's immediate periphery, which is like, talking about Pakistan, Myanmar, and also Sri Lanka. So the immediate periphery, where Bangladesh, and what kind of threat that India has, and India's foreign policy. So I bring in Ambassador Shiv Shankar Menon, who is the National Security Advisor, again, who reviewed my book, and many others, scholars who have sort of, contributed to India's national security. So their perspectives and how we can make sort of regional architecture, security, regional architecture. So that's basically on the security chapter, and I moved to the foreign policy, which is my my interest area of the foreign policy and geopolitics. So I bring in sort of, Mackinder's work on Indo-Pacific, how Mackinder saw two islands, Japan and United Kingdom, how important those two islands were to the two oceans. And I try to bring Sri Lanka into that equation of Mackinder, sort of how important is Sri Lanka sitting at the geostrategic location in the sea lines of communications and to the Indian Ocean security, and how important it is for the Sri Lanka to have a balanced foreign policy. So I quote Ambassador Robert Blake in here. So he said that don't allow Sri Lanka to have sort of binary choices, choose between China and the US, which is a very important quote from him. And so try to sort of discuss those ideas that the ambassadors have discussed. And also the Chinese, the debt trap, which is, I think a lot of comments came for that particular chapter on the debt trap, and which I call it extended towards the strategic trap is happening. I think today, the CIA director has released a comment on the debt trap in Sri Lanka, Director Burns. So on this particular issue, saying that look at Sri Lanka as an example. So we were clearly highlighting this in some of the projects were not, we for example, the Sri Lanka, we spent billions, and then the expected revenue is not coming in. Then what they did was they took the port for 99 years lease. So it was the Chinese who leased the port for 99 years lease. And this sort of model has a military dimension, so which I'm sort of discussing, civil military dimension, because we closer to the port. I think Bob has been to the served in Sri Lanka. Really honored to have you as the deputy ambassador. So he, we've seen how close proximity they built the airport, where the Auditor General has written a complete audit report saying, why did you build this airport closer to a natural sanctuary? Elephants, about 100 elephants come closer to the airport. There is birds, it's a bird sanctuary right next to it. Authorities managed to get EA clearance, environmental clearance. These are the questions. So if the airport was built by China and then there's no flights, there's a few flights coming in, but then it's not functioning, then there's another reason for it. So I bring in Professor Swaran Singh and many Indian scholars discussing, okay, there must be some sort of a strategic direction because there is a strategic interest, a long-term interest. So that's the part of the debt trap, which I discuss. And then I move into the domestic politics. And the domestic politics, I speak about, how the institutions, how weak the institutions are, and basically the parliament, for example, there's one particular article about bombs and elections that's also very popular. I think a lot of comments on that, because I did a trend analysis in about five cases in South Asia where bombs went closer to the elections and how it alters the election results. So like 1 week before you have a bomb blast, then it alters what's the impact towards the candidate. And then I try to see in other parts of the world, does it happen in other parts of the world? But it doesn't happen in any other region. So only in South Asia, that was unique. India, there was a bomb blast, it altered the election results. Pakistan, there was a bomb blast, Benazir Bhutto, it altered her. So then I sort of think, does the bombers want to communicate with the winners? So Easter Sunday bombing is also very interesting. 1 week after Easter Sunday bombing, you had a presidential campaign launched by the president who Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who escaped now, has gone away from Sri Lanka. So I have questioned some of the autocratic, sentiments he tried to bring into the country. the military, the heavily militarized rule, the 27 military appointments. So is Sri Lanka being a rich democracy from, I mean, starting from 1931, the constitution from the British time, but we've been sort of exercising democratic, liberal democratic values, and we have that. And so are we ready to sort of bring in a new model, which China was supporting that model? I mean, some of the comments that came from China directly from the foreign minister, Wang Yi, when he came several times to Sri Lanka. And Gotabaya, what he did was he accepted this model, keep on accepting that, okay, we are okay to try out a different model. So I think the experiment went wrong, definitely. And you can see the people, his inward policy prescription. So the issues that you're having in Sri Lanka right now is clearly captured in this book.
Can you tell us a little bit about, if this existed for you, what were some of the core questions about Sri Lanka, especially at the time that you're compiling all of this research and analysis, but also historically, that you wanted to answer in this book or to address in this book, if there are any?
The historical factors, which I sort of highlight, I mean, most of the chapters I begin with a historical note. I think it's really important to sort of capture that moment in history, especially the geopolitics chapter. Because what happened, I mean, let me give you an example. I've quoted the Indian the Prime Minister, Narasimha Rao. So he mentions that about why India needs to have a national defense policy, the importance of having a national defense policy. So he keeps on discussing at the parliament, Indian parliament. I saw it like, hold on, like I never saw something like this coming from a South Asian leader. And this is the first time that I've sort of seen going on about India needs a national defense policy, a written national defense policy. So I captured that. So that historical moment of Narasimha Rao, I try to then apply to Sri Lanka. Why can't we have a national defense policy? And look, so, and the best part was Australia and many other countries did help Sri Lanka to compile a national defense policy at that time. And so Sri Lanka managed to have some sort of, a written document. So written policies are really important. And what we have, even our foreign policy is not written. So every leader who comes forward and says it's a balanced foreign policy. I quote again, going to history, woman prime minister of the world is from Sri Lanka, and Sirimau Bandaranaike. So I quote her of her work, for example, in 1970s, she spoke about Indian Ocean Zone for peace. Why don't we sort of, work together on Indian Ocean Zone for peace with all countries together, the non-aligned countries. So these are really great initiatives taken by a woman leader at that time. But I think they need to sort of, move forward. I mean, looking at all these geopolitical tension right now, we don't have mechanisms. I mean, there's one particular article to European Union. I mean, when the EU article, basically the EU in the Pacific policy, which EU office in Colombo, they asked me to review it and sort of give some of the comments about Indo-Pacific policy of European Union. And what I found was that they've been very diplomatic. I said, I mean, unlike the United States, who has directly pointed where the issue is, which is China. And they've been very sort of diplomatic. So I said, you've been very, trying to sort of create that, but then you need mechanisms. Then again, they speak about how do you sort of, address the 5G issues, how do you address the large amount of debt in these countries. So what are the toolkits? The toolkits are missing. So I think all of this, there is sort of, again, on the European, for example, I highlight some of the historical factors coming in from Europe. Italy, I mentioned clearly about how Italy was one of the first the countries who sort of supported the China's BRI, signing MOUs, and without Brussels being informed. And so these are serious issues which United States, as well as many other countries face. And in the Pacific, if you look at it, what I'm sort of, there is a reference to, when I saw the footage of Prime Minister Abe, I was so sad of what really happened. And I was mentioned about these, FOIPs, the free and open in the Pacific, how important, how valuable is FOIPs to a country like Sri Lanka, and how much we can bring in, those values, because Sri Lanka's commitment, if you look at it in the 1970s on the law of the sea, the Indian Ocean Zone for peace, there's so much of commitment, but then we have not done much to the free and open in the Pacific. Having sort of, because our leaders, if you look at the previous leader who tilted completely the foreign policy towards China, and I call it a bandwagon foreign policy. So
that is quite a lot to digest. So I want to talk a little bit more specifically about, we talked a little bit about this over the video chat the last time we spoke, but some of the people that you had to kind of dive deep into their role in Sri Lankan politics. You mentioned kind of delving into the first woman prime minister, but also leaders internal to Sri Lanka, external in the surrounding states, as well as across the ocean and part of the EU and all of that. What are some really poignant highlights that come from those conversations and from that research?
So I have had, because I've served as, from my experience as the Director General of the National Security Think Tank, so conversations with the President, as well as also the high-level leaders of Sri Lanka. I served the entire Mahinda Rajapaksa tenure as the foreign policy. There's a think tank called Kadirgama Institute in Sri Lanka, so I was heading that. So my direct conversations, the 50 years of Mahinda Rajapaksa, how he celebrates. So I wrote a piece about that, how people saw him as a symbolic leader after winning the war in 2009, and how sort of, what happened to his political legacy if he keeps on, what I wrote when he was the president at that time. So I wrote a piece, he was a bit angry about it. I said about extending his term for any number of times. So he amended the constitution, which is against the democratic values. So my piece was basically saying, you've done something, which is against the constitution to alter to remain in power, as well as bringing the independent institutions like the police commission, the bribery commission, directly under his control. So the independence of basically of those institutions were lost. The result of that particular point, which I try to highlight, it was published in Sri Lankan newspapers also. But I think his foreign secretary at that time wrote a letter to me, and that was very interesting. They were saying that please, against the government policies. So as a director of the research and policy think tank, so I had to face all that. But then that was the right thing to do, to advise the leaders to go in that direction. So those conversations were there, but then I think that helped me to sort of understand my country as well as all the region. I mean, my interactions from my travels from the World Economic Forum, meeting many leaders, such as, in Singapore, I've met several leaders in Singapore, as well as, even my conversation with Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar, basically on reconciliation. So I had about 30 minutes of conversation with she said that quite similar, which is very interesting, talk about reconciliation, and she asked me about my background and asked me about my father. So I said my father was assassinated, and so she said my father was also assassinated. And so we had this conversation in Thailand, and she said about reconciliation and how to sort of bring in Buddhist values into the reconciliation process. But when I mean, after the incidents with the Rohingyas, and so I was not so happy of those decisions that she took on the minority community. And I was also not happy with how they treated our minority community in Sri Lanka. So I call it like a majoritarian rule parliament in Sri Lanka, trying to suppress the minority rights. And for the Tamilians, the Muslims, for example, the forced cremation introduced by Gotabaya for the Muslims during the COVID, and also the Tamilians on the Prevention of the Terrorism Act, using harassing as well as bringing many human rights in Geneva has highlighted this. But the Sri Lankan government keep on rejecting and not taking any recommendation. So we are not moving forward as a nation. So this is something that I'm sort of nudging at the director, as a director, and sort of was talking until Gotabaya came and he got me out, and he basically transferred me out. So that is a leader I could not work a single day. And that I'm happy that I couldn't. And also at this moment, because now he's no more the leader, and the people of Sri Lanka have got together and had this amazing sort of, and the first time in the Sri Lankan history our executive have been chased like this. I mean, walking in, you must have seen the footage, going into the presidential house. And I see it as an Arab Spring because of the three characteristics. It matches exactly because Arab Spring, if you look at it, there were because of the autocratic rule, because of corruption, and also the economic condition. So all three matched the Sri Lankan situation. So the people actually, 9th of July was an historical moment for Sri Lanka.
I'm glad you segued into that because as I assume many of us here know, the recent events in Sri Lanka are of huge historical importance. And I wonder if you can offer us a little bit of sort of a timeline. Like, what are the events that you feel led to this moment? What are the political choices? What are the, both within Sri Lanka and from outside pressures that drove us to this moment, especially when it comes to the president being fleeing the office?
I think it was clearly captured by the researchers, not only me, other Sri Lankans who saw, who was working in the democratic space. When I was assigned at the USA for this, the field study in 2021, I was the senior researcher back in Sri Lanka. We did more than 75 interviews. So what we captured was this, exactly what was happening. If anybody read that, it was very unfortunate that it went internal use because of the sensitivity of some of the information, because it is very clear, because you have a president who was having 27 military appointments in different ministries. Even the Ministry of Archaeology, they had a military person, trying to sort of justify that some of the archaeological sites are Sinhalese but not Tamil in the north and east. And it was a heavily militarized model which he tried to exercise. And then he completely, his critiques, he saw them as he was targeting them, and he was completely sort of, one of the senior editors was telling me that the Minister of Defense called him, and because of one of my articles. So that's it. That was the end of my articles in Sri Lanka. And my last article before I came to the United States was called Coming Anarchy to Sri Lanka, which was published in India and many other outlets outside. So Coming Anarchy, I wrote, said that I sort of specifically highlighted president's intervention in the judiciary. Why at that time, president has pardoned a political criminal, giving him presidential pardon, and sort of interfering with the judiciary. So the heavy interference would bring in anarchy to the country because of the institution as well as the bureaucracy will fall one by one. And that's what happened now. Now, in this anarchic situation where you have 3 cabinets within 2 months, Now the president is elected, appointed yesterday, and now he has the first day today. So appointing the prime minister, and sort of apparently he's keeping the same cabinet. But it is sort of the institutions are not functioning. It's an anarchic situation because even for donors to work, you need those institutions, the IMF. How do they function without? You have the central bank. You need the finance minister in place. So you don't have that. So I think I saw that coming in the anarchic sort of the environment. The human rights was a serious issue in Sri Lanka. And when I interviewed some of the minority community members, I was very upset as a majority. I'm seeing this, but then some of the issues that they were facing, concerns that that they have to go through, and so that's clearly captured by the human rights reports as well as all that, but it is not being implemented or nothing being done. Although they use the reconciliation word, saying, okay, we are working on reconciliation, but there's nothing on the table. So those are I think the inward policy prescription that he carried forward, which is like, seeing the IMF as the economic hitman, and then rejecting the IMF, the policy. Basically, the IMF informed Sri Lanka years before that this situation is going to happen. He kept on relying on China a lot. If you look at the visits of the Chinese delegations, as well as the loans that we have got, especially during the COVID, and during the pandemic, it gave us more strength for him to strengthen the military, as well as, military was used for the forefront of fighting the pandemic. So, and that gave him, I think, the civil military balance was lost. And these are the main political issues that he had to sort of got into this whole, and also heavy borrowings that we had. So all that triggered, and people are now, 70% of Sri Lankans, according to UN, are hungry now. They're having only one meal a day. And you have a serious humanitarian crisis which is not addressed now.
Thank you. Everything you just said resonates with me, especially as a citizen in the United States, where you could say a lot of comparable events have been occurring. And I wonder if you have any analysis on that and drawing similarities between what the last several years in Sri Lanka and the last several years in the United States have looked like. Obviously, with the caveat that they are very different countries, right? But you're talking about overpowered military and centralized, monopolized control of government offices, increased oppression of minorities, and all of these things sound pretty familiar. So I wonder if you have some thoughts about that.
Some of the questions I got even in the media, like CNN, they asked me to compare to January 6th, but it is not comparable to January 6th, because here is a situation where people got together against an autocratic ruler, and you had a very different situation in here. I've written about President Trump's certain decisions that he took, are very illogical, irrational, pulling out from the Human Rights Council. It was like a novel. Sometimes going to North Korea by staying in Singapore and meeting them in Singapore, and then I don't know if one of my kids read about his decisions, it would be a beautiful novel. And one day, did this really happen? I can't sort of see how bad the United States policy decisions were taken at that time. Looking at from a South Asian perspective, moving out from regionalism, multilateralism, those are the institutions that strengthen the United States as a country. That's how I see. I referred to Mersheimer's work, Chicago School scholar, multiple times, and also Kishore Mehbooban. It's also very interesting. He's my teacher also, but then we disagree on. He says that there's a decline of the West happening in his books, and the rise of China. And then, but I say, there's nothing like that. I don't see a decline happening. So I think the institution weaknesses, bring sort of all that. And the poem which I have captured on the first page, which is from Seamus Heaney, I think it's about building a house when you have scaffoldings, weak scaffoldings. If you have weak scaffoldings, what happens to the walls? It will fall down. So the institutions are very important. What President Trump did was, I think, interfering with the institutions that was created, and also putting many allies in serious sort of when they were to Japan, as well as the European Union, they went through a struggle. So I think South Asia was also affected. But now I see tremendous improvement right now in democracy as well as on the human rights issues, because we need assistance. Here's a country strategically well positioned in the Indian Ocean, but then I call it sandwiched between the BRI and the Indo-Pacific. But how do we sort of resolve this? Okay, why can't we introduce good, toolkits to even the Chinese? Okay, let's talk about projects that they have, the BRI projects, and let's have some more transparency in them. Let's borrow in less interest rates. Even for the debt restructuring right now, which is a big issue, China is not willing to restructure our debt. So they are, that's the delay that Sri Lanka is having right now. So without China's assistance, we can't restructure the debt. So I think China also needs to sort of, see how to play a more collaborative role. And I think that will help many other countries like Sri Lanka, as well as, the other BRI countries also.
Absolutely. You just mentioned the poem, and earlier today you said maybe that your son would like to read the poem for us. Would you like to do that?
Thank you.
Scaffolding by Seamus Heaney. Masons, when they start upon a building, are careful to test out the scaffolding. Make sure that planks won't slip at busy points. Secure all ladders, tighten bolted joints, and yet all this comes down when the job's done. Showing off walls of sure and solid stone. So if, my dear, there sometimes seem to be old bridges breaking between you and me, never fear. We may let the scaffolds fall, confident that we have built our wall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. So I know that you had some particular sections of the book that you wanted to highlight. So you have your sticky notes there.
I think I've covered all, because your questions got me into talking about it, and I think most of the stuff has been covered from your questions. So I think we have get the audience to ask us and interact, and I would like to
And for those of you watching at home, you can leave your question as a comment on the video that you're watching right now, and we'll get to it as well.
Do you have on the Chinese debt deal? Do you have to know what the interest rate is and what the IMF might give you as an interest rate? There's a difference. Maybe it's worthwhile doing.
That's a very important question. The biggest issue is we have got the Chinese loans in different interest rates. For example,
It's not one interest rate,
no, it's not one. So for example, the Hambantota port, which is the major project, we have got loans in different times and different years. So one particular loan, I can tell you, it was 6.4% interest rate. So that's some of the think tanks. I mean, when I came to DC, I was reading about the debt trap, which is very interesting for me. And one particular think tank captured saying there's no debt trap. The debt trap is a lie, and there's no logic behind it. I said, hold on, okay, what's going on here? So what they've done is very simple thing. So they have not seen the agreement. None of these people have seen the 99-year agreement. It is confidential. It is only to the eyes of the people who have sort of in the government and all that. So they're making assumptions on the 99-year lease agreement. And the second is on the lease, the interest rates, which you were asked. So what they say is the Japanese loans and the Chinese loans are same, which is about 10%.
Whoa.
So 10%.
So that IMF's got to be what, 3% or something?
Yeah, so no, so that's the thing. So exactly, the Japanese loans are less than 1% interest rates.
Okay. All right.
So they're saying that the Japanese are also saying to the Chinese, and so there is no debt trap. And this was picked up by Chatham House, so very interesting. So I had a sort of a response to that, published in an article published in Sweden. And so that was about, it's a vessels can't come into Hambantota. What was that assumption? Like, who made that? Saying they've sort of measured the the harbor mouth, the depth. Military vessels can easily come in, and this was discussed with the naval officers in Sri Lanka. And military vessels can come in. If the military large vessels can come in, they can be a front logistics hub, which the Pentagon has clearly highlighted in the defense of their defense policy. So I think some of those debunking theories need to be sort of looked at really carefully. There is a kind of a debt trap, clearly, in Sri Lanka. And what I see is, more than the interest rate, the longer term sort of like the strategic trap. So the strategic trap, which I sort of coined, has Chinese Communist Party. That's actually a completely different paper, which I have written, how much of money that they have given to the political party to alter the existing model. The second is basically on human rights, where China supports Sri Lanka, and reciprocally, Sri Lankan Foreign Secretary starts speaking about Xinjiang for the first time. So reciprocally, there is an agreement on human rights, and then the military agreements. So military to military, agreement between China and Russia. So those are the attributes that will sort of trigger a strategic trap. So the interest rates plays a huge role. I mean, the question was very important, and right now we can't get into restructuring. That restructuring is required from the IMF as a conditionality. So China is not agreeing to the restructuring. So this is where the problem is. So the other countries are accepting it, but then China is saying that we're going to restructure. The reason China is saying this is, what they're saying is the reply is that if we give it to Sri Lanka, we'd have to give to other countries also.
Yes. Oh, wouldn't that be?
One aspect of recent events in Sri Lanka that we haven't touched on tonight is agriculture and food security. I was wondering if you could address food security in the context of greater national security and security architecture.
Very important question. Actually, thank you for that. Food security is one of the biggest issues we had. The downfall of the former president, the Gotabaya Rajapaksa, was his fertilizer. What he did was overnight shift from chemical fertilizer to organic fertilizer, which impacted the entire industry. When he did that, now a lot of people again misread that. When he did that, there were Chinese vessels coming in. I wrote one particular on that, saying that why is a Chinese vessel trying to bring in chemical fertilizers? That particular vessel has never come to Sri Lanka. And what I traced was that what he did was change of suppliers. But then he had a marketing campaign of going organic. So behind that needs more research actually. So what I know is that the Chinese vessel came to Hambantota port. They tried to unload it, but then the authorities did not allow basically the vessel, because some of the fertilizers were contaminated. And so the authorities actually blocked that. And that prevented, that created a huge issue between China and Sri Lanka, bilateral. And then before Wang Yi, the foreign minister, came to Sri Lanka, 24 hours before that, we had paid for that. So I questioned in my piece saying, why did we have to pay 24 hours before Wang Yi, steps to Sri Lanka? So behind the fertilizer crisis, there were many other issues going on. But what happened was there was a huge shortage because of that overnight shift, and it impacted the entire agricultural industry. And the farmers, had a huge difficulty. And so that's what we are facing right now is the result of that. And right now, India is supporting on fertilizer. India has been 3.5 billion. India, as the closest country, has come forward. I think without the Indian assistance, we would have been like in a total, disarray right now. But it's amazingly they have come forward and given all these assistance. Then the fuel is another. Agriculture is one particular, but the fuel is going. It's another huge issue as well. So it has to be addressed right now. And agriculture security is an agrarian, economy, although it's heavily import driven. But we do have, the agrarian. So we need to sort of bring that back.
Love the talk. Really interesting topic. You mentioned, you were quoting Mearsheimer in there, and I'm wondering where all of this is heading with. It seems like there's a bit of a souring opinion on the deal that they got with the Chinese, and whether that's going to create greater appetite for a rebalancing of their strategic footprint towards the United States in the context of growing engagement in Indo-Pacific and the Quad and AUKUS, and what's of the recent domestic crisis and how that'll influence a possible reshuffling of political weight for the U.S. and what can we do to further that?
So, thank you for that. That's a big question actually. So there's a lot in it to unpack. First, if I go to the political side, you mentioned that's a very important observation. So a few hours ago, I spoke to Al Jazeera about the same. So there's two scenarios that I see Sri Lanka at this moment. One is the president to work with the protesters, which is there's a huge trust deficit between what the president, what the protesters want and what the demands, as well as what the president is he's trying to. Right now he's not doing the right thing. If you ask, like a few hours ago, he sent the military to crack down the protests. I saw the live footages that's going on, and some of the social media and then what's going on here. So he's chosen to crack down, but that's not the way I think he should move forward. We should talk to the protesters, try to satisfy the protesters to some sort of thing, because what they're asking is very reasonable. They're asking basically, give abolishing of the executive presidency has been there from many years in Sri Lanka, and there's a consensus, like more than 70% of public polls says let's abolish this position, right, the executive presidency. So one conditionality is like an accountability on looted money, corruption charges of the former guy. You can't have a military flight escorting this former president out of the country, and now he's in Singapore. Okay, what the people are protesters want is like, give us the money back, give us, corruption, investigations of the corruption charges. So that has to happen. And what they're asking is a fair demand. They want the democracy back. They want to re-democratize the country. And so that's the first scenario. And if the president talking to and bridging the trust deficit between the protesters. The second is what he's doing right now. A few hours ago, I saw that footage. So that's if he goes against crackdown of the protests, it will emerge again. It's not going to go down. If he's going to arrest, keep on arresting people, and how many is he going to arrest? And this is like thousands of people. you saw that, I mean, it's not, and then there's no one particular leader of the protests. There's so many leaders. So this is the thing. So it's a sort of a hybrid network of protesters. And the interesting part is that if he goes on that trajectory of cracking down the protests, you will invite the military into the forefront, state of emergency, as well as, and Sri Lanka can easily move into a military model, which is like Myanmar. I mean, not Myanmar, but a new model in the making, I would say. But this is a dangerous thing because you have a military that has fought 30 years of war, so 3 decades of war. And you had that, Gotabaya left that military footprint, I mean, in those institutions and all that. So you need to be, I think, I hope because of his maturity, the new president, he's been prime minister for 6 times in our country. And he's been in politics for a long time. And I've seen him talking to the international community. I have traveled with him to Davos one time, where he spoke to the international community. I think brilliant. I mean, he's got all that. So I think he should follow a better path than, cracking down, going on. Here is the problem is that the protesters have identified him as part of the old regime. Now that's the biggest problem he has. So because he had only 1 seat in the parliament when he became the prime minister, and he was not elected from the people. So he came from a back channel through the previous president. So he needs to sort of legitimize that whole thing and, talk to them in a way that to satisfy some of the demands and work some sort of political stability, at least talking to the other parties, the political parties. And so to stabilize it, I mean, because here you have people with the person are hungry and you have so much of fuel queues, already 16 people are dead. So things can get worse, and it's quite sad if it gets into a humanitarian crisis, and I hope it will not get into that stage. So that's what I think. Your other question on the Indo-Pacific. So it's very important that Sri Lanka as a country has some specific commitments towards Indo-Pacific. Now, the weakness of Indo-Pacific, US Indo-Pacific strategy, I have spoken about it earlier also, that you're not sort of front-loading the demands. It's just it's a paper, of course, yes, but then it's the countries like Sri Lanka should have specific commitments towards it. And I'm asking as a Sri Lankan that US should, have those. And what Abe was talking on the FOIPs and all that. So if Sri Lankan foreign ministry can send sort of say, okay, we are committed to this, and you need some sort of document in because here is a country. If you're talking if you're talking about democracy, liberal values in Sri Lanka and all that, so if you're doing that, and then again you're working with against those norms and values, so there is no commitment. So I think it's very important that you have those commitments from country-specific commitments. That will help India also to ease, for example, Prime Minister Modi's neighborhood first policy, and which he has. And so it will ease India also, because the tension I have clearly mentioned, I was in New Delhi when the Indian foreign minister was giving a talk, and it was very interesting. Salman Khurshid at that time said like he's feeling like Muhammad Ali getting punched from South India, and that's how the central government he said that the regional provincial governments can't dictate terms to the central government, and this is on the during human rights vote against Sri Lanka. So India gets into sort of very hard decisions and challenging decisions when it comes to Sri Lanka. And of course, US would need to see Sri Lanka's, again, another side I did not see was like direct intervention. I mean, not through India, but India is important. Indian for example, the policy directives are important, but then you should have also direct inputs coming in from Colombo on this Indo-Pacific, for example, commitment. So that will ease India's pressure also, because India has a lot to do with these immediate peripheries. So I hope I answered your question. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your talk. So that's a good segue into my question. I was just curious to hear your thoughts on how you see India responding to the crisis in Sri Lanka, kind of for the medium and long term, just given the levels of assistance that they bilateral.
Thank you for that. Of course, that's a very important question. That we have India, like is the only, like I said, 3.5 billion given, and then they're extending that for the fuel, which is like the most important right now. The commodity, like we are out of fuel, and the country is like, people are given a token when you walk into a fuel shed, and then they have to wait for 3-4 days waiting for so the industries have stopped, everything has stopped. So India's, I think the assistance is very crucial right now to Sri Lanka. And bilaterally, India, I know the all party, there was a discussion about Sri Lanka yesterday. And I think it's really important to have the democratic wheels functioning right now. Because if, I know in the past, India has sometimes, if they move a little bit on the political side, or even say elements in, like, political factions in Sri Lanka, okay, there is some foreign interventions coming in. Because in the past they had military interventions, back in, so there is not, unlike in 1988, 89, it's a different kind of, completely different environment with social media and, a lot of disinformation. So India has to, it's a very cautionary sort of, I would say the next month is going to be very cautionary, because anything that New Delhi says will play a huge and have a huge impact in Colombo. And so what India could do is assist and try to sort of, advise. One of the very interesting points I found was from the British Parliament. Ed Davey, a few days ago, he spoke, he's the leader of the Liberal Democratic Party. He said that Sri Lanka requires 2 packages, one economic, one political. Economic is from the IMF and all that, let's assist them. But political, why are we silent? So what he's saying about political is not on political intervention, but he's saying let's assist them on accountability, such as, okay, there's looted money or some international arrest warrant. He even mentions that. So if you require something like that, what? So that's definitely on democratic view. So India can definitely assist if they require an election in Sri Lanka. What the protesters want is new faces in the legislature. So this is a very difficult moment because so they want to get re-elected also. And they will try their level best. So they have rejected every time they put up the cabinet. They said we don't want this guy. So the protesters is having a huge clout and a power for the first time in the Sri Lankan history. And there is a sort of, that's why I mentioned there's a huge trust deficit. So maybe India can, but India definitely needs to stabilize Sri Lanka, because my worry is that even the Easter Sunday bombing happened, like if you look at it a few months before we had the constitutional coup, the government, completely was dismantled, and everybody, Prime Minister was not talking to the president at that time. So then you had the bombing. So security situation in Sri Lanka is very fragile, because it's a fragile state right now. The institutions are not functioning. So, anything could happen. It's kind of a clear warning also, because there is political factions who wants to take advantage of the situation. And the US, India, I think the Western alliance should be very play with a very cautious note and monitor the situation. And so I think that's the best way, I would say, to move, the next steps to take. Thank you.
Time for one more.
Hi everybody, my name is Simran and I'm a grad student at the Pleasure School. So my question to you is regarding the security architectures which we are seeing in the Indo-Pacific. How do you think small island countries like Sri Lanka can actually leverage these security architectures? And there are a lot of security architectures right now. Can put forward their needs and leverage these architectures altogether, because in my understanding these architectures look like deterrence for China and not actually really supporting the small island nations.
Thank you. That's a very good question again. I think if you look at my recent article on Solomon Islands, I think, and Sri Lanka, the comparison, what the president, the prime minister of Solomon Island is going through, as well as the Sri Lankan leaders are going through. I did a sort of a comparative, and then it's quite interesting. We had to sort of sometimes there was like certain decisions that they took. There was knee-jerk reactions because there was not much of concentration on these important islands, littorals. I bring in Raja Mohan's work in here, identifying why littorals are so important. Solomon Islands are so important because of the, the 3 lines of communications that, travel and to the west, as well as Sri Lanka. So the littorals and their security architecture is really, really important. And what littorals can play, what is the role that countries like Sri Lanka, Solomon Islands can play for their own regional architecture. The issues that Solomon Islands, if you look at it, what they had with Australia is the same issues that I compared that Sri Lanka is having with India. And because of the Chinese presence in both the countries, Solomon Islands as well as in Sri Lanka, and what they're doing. So the alterations of certain models, and then the leaders talking about, bringing in different sort of security architectures into it. That's the dangerous area. Sri Lankan, for example, Sri Lanka, the entire telecommunications, 80% of the telecommunications industry, the network is run by Huawei and CTV. So it's already, the 5G networks are already present in Maldives. So when I interviewed one of the Huawei people in Sri Lanka, and they're very interesting. In my interview, he says that, look, Maldives did it first, and why aren't you guys doing it? No, we have done it in Maldives, and why are you so late? I know the pressure that President Sirisena had when he was given a surveillance, for example, on to the police during his time. So that document came to the National Security think tank, and we looked at it very carefully on the surveillance as well as cameras and all that and bringing in. But then it's a very Sri Lanka beginning, and then but there is a serious security concern of those accepting those. But I'm happy that Sirisena did not accept it. He went on. It was a lot of pressure to our leaders. So the security architecture cannot be built when you have interference coming in. So India is having the difficulty of creating that regional security architecture. I have a paper on a book which I spoke on IDSA about the regional security architecture. I think that will be useful for you. So the pressure that the leaders have is serious. I remember when I went with Prime Minister Abeyagoonasekera to Davos, and it was very interesting. So Wickremesinghe was telling, so there was this delegation, Chinese delegation in Davos, and they were said, they're here also. They said, like, why are they here? They followed me to Davos. And it was very interesting. He was getting very uncomfortable because I know that there was questions about Hambantota in that panel, and there was this, so I think the pressure is there because obviously, they want to have their own sort of ways of, setting up their security architecture. I sort of go deeper into submarine cables that is laid to detect, for example, submarines. the sources network. I managed to even get the map from the Australian Academy, and so I have it. It's on the book, as well as I think how China uses the oceanographic studies, using oceanographic studies, but then, we have many oceanographic visits to Sri Lanka, the Chinese vessels. But are they really coming for oceanographic, or what are they? So there is the duality, the nexus. So we cannot build a regional security architecture with all these concerns. And because Sri Lanka need to support India to build a regional security architecture. But unfortunately, our regimes are so it's fragile. The states have become completely dysfunctional. Look at Pakistan. The best example is like when Mahinda Rajapaksa stepped down and Imran Khan, they both stepped down on the same week. Raja Mohan was very interesting. He told me to write a piece about Imran Khan and Mahinda Rajapaksa. So, I think these things happen in the immediate periphery, and it's very important to have a strong regional security architecture in place. Okay. Sorry, I've taken more.
No, not at all. Thank you so much. This has been an incredible talk. I feel like I learned quite a lot. I'm grateful for all of you and your incredible questions. Asanga, again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. For those of you watching at home, and actually for our audience here, where can we keep up with your work? Where is a good place to follow you if you want to?
You can follow me on my website. So it's asangaabey.com. So everything is on the site, and what I write with the lady columns, as well as my commentaries that's given. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here tonight. Everyone, please feel free to stick around and chat. If you'd like to grab your copy of the book, you can grab it here, and perhaps Asanga will be kind enough to sign it for you.
Well, I can try another website, but on Facebook and everything else. We still come from international.